Friends, today we are going to discuss the negotiation, the process of negotiation, and how we can deal with this process of negotiation and negotiate effectively. All of you know that negotiation is an integral part of our lives, and throughout our lives we continue to negotiate. We negotiate with our friends, we negotiate with our neighbors, we negotiate with our parents, and we negotiate with our relatives. And even in our offices, we negotiate with our colleagues. So we can understand the fact that negotiation is a very important part of our lives. But if we try to analyze this process, or say gives a serious thought to the process of negotiations, we'll find that we give little time and thought to the process of negotiation, and actual time is not given to what we call that how to prepare for the process of negotiations. So the aim of today's session is to understand the concept of negotiations and how to negotiate effectively. So this would be the aim and objective for today's session. As all of you are aware that negotiation is a process wherein two or more than two people exchange goods or services at an agreed upon rate. So this means that if two people have an issue or have a good or a service which they want to exchange, suppose a person wants to sell a car and another person has a need and wants to buy a car. So they will enter into a negotiation. One person will try to push the price of the car on the higher side because he wants to sell the car and wants to get the maximum benefit out of selling that car. And on the contrary, there is another person who intends to buy this car. The person would like to have the price as low as possible because every penny he saves would contribute to his savings. So it is at times a clash of interest as well. So it's very important that without directly jumping into the process of negotiation, we understand how the negotiations take place. First of all, we would try to understand the types of negotiations. Generally, there are two types of negotiations. One is distributive negotiation and the other is integrative negotiation. The distributive negotiation means that once the resources that are available to us need to be divided, this is called as distributive negotiation. This can be highlighted by an example which I was just now giving, that of a car. A person wants to sell a car and other person wants to buy a car. This is a distributive negotiation because the resources are to be divided. One person's gain results in other person's loss. Say party A wants to sell the car and wants to sell it for 1,20,000 rupees, and party B wants to buy this car for 1 lakh rupees. So their objectives are different, and if party A is able to sell this car at 1,20,000 rupees, that means the person earns more, 20,000 rupees more. And on the contrary, if the party B is able to get this car for 1 lakh rupees, that means he has saved another 20,000 rupees. So this is what we call as distributive bargaining. Say it is a kind of win-lose situation wherein one party wins and the other party loses. So if we are talking about the feasibility of distributive bargaining, it is normally used in places and situations wherein there is limited number of contacts between the persons and relationship maintenance is a low priority. This can be highlighted by an example. Say a person goes into the shop and wants to buy a particular product at the minimum possible price. It is not that he wants to develop a relationship with that particular shopkeeper. So he would like to buy at the minimum possible price. This is what we call as distributive bargaining or negotiations. And in the same way, it is important that the persons who enter into distributive negotiation understand that it's a one-time opportunity, and the relationship maintenance is a very low priority in such situations. Hence, we should try to avoid using this type of negotiation when we are having a kind of relationship. Say suppose a customer relationship organization having a relationship with its customers, they cannot go for what we call as distributive bargaining, because they have to win over the customer for a long time. They have to win over his or her loyalty for a long period of time. So it's very important that this distributive bargaining or negotiation should be used very selectively. And on the contrary, if we talk about another type of bargaining or negotiation, it is called as integrative bargaining or negotiation. So what does integrative mean? Wherein integrative bargaining or negotiation means wherein two people who enter into a negotiation over an issue or a problem or over a kind of resource, what they try to do, they are not aiming at undermining each other. They are not aiming at winning and losing, wherein each party intends to win and at the cost of the other party. But in integrative bargaining, both the parties try to contribute their efforts, their ideas and their opinions in arriving at a solution where the benefits for both the parties are maximized. So suppose if we take a hypothetical example of any organization wherein a person is, say, a salesman or a sales representative of a company, gets an order from a particular organization, but the person who is offering him the order or the company who is offering him this order has a rider that they want to pay or they will pay this money after 6 days, that there is a credit limit of 60 days for this order. But when this person or the sales officer goes to his company and to the credit manager, who is responsible for looking after the credits which the company has offered, and when he goes there, the person is very reluctant because the company which has given them the order does not enjoy a high level of credit worthiness, and the credit manager is very skeptical about the commitment made by the person that he will be paying the money within 60 days. So what is the way out? The salesman has worked so hard for getting this order, and the credit manager doesn't want to run after that person to get the money for the company back. So both these interests seem to be opposing. One person wants to safeguard the money of the company and the other person wants to get the business for the company. And if we see this at the face of it, seems that the interests are contradictory and there is no viable solution where both the parties can satisfy themselves. But there is a way out, because say if the credit manager agrees to this proposition that this order, say we may supply them, the concerned party, the goods, but if the party is not in a position to pay the money within stipulated period of 60 days, the company should give a bank guarantee. So if the bank guarantee is provided, this is a kind of way out where both the parties arrive at a solution which is satisfactory and satisfies both the parties. So the salesperson or the sales representative gets the order for the company and credit manager makes it sure that the payment of the company is safe and secure. So in the same way, in this integrative bargaining, both these persons have used their energies, directed their energies and directed their resources for arriving at a solution which is acceptable to both. And if we see this problem, it is a kind of win-win situation for both the persons, and it has also managed to develop a stronger relationship between the people involved. So main aim of integrative bargaining is to maintain the relations, develop the relations, and not to win at the cost of other persons. And if we see this integrative bargaining, it is one of the most successful ways of bargaining, wherein both the parties feel that they have won and both the parties feel that they have satisfied themselves and satisfied their objectives. And this is a kind of win-win situation for both the parties. And the relationship, which is very important in present day's world, is developed. So the thrust of integrative bargaining is to arrive at solutions, those are acceptable or those are viable for both the parties involved in the process of negotiation, and strengthens the relationship between the parties involved so that they can interact in future as well. After types of negotiations, it's very important that we understand how to go into the process of negotiations, actually how to negotiate. So all of us know that distributive bargaining or negotiation may be good at certain times, but it's very important that we go for integrative bargaining. So how are we going to go for such a bargaining or negotiation process? It's very important that we identify the elements those are involved in the process of negotiation. The first thing that we should try to understand, that we should, in the process of negotiation, we should separate people from problems. This means normally what we do in our process of negotiation, we basically identify the people and consider them the problems itself. So suppose we don't gel with any person, so whatever he or she says, we have a negative reaction for that. And even if the person tries to communicate with us, he may be sincere, he may be honest in giving the opinion or giving the ideas, we shut our ears, we shut ourselves, and we don't listen actively. So we feel that whatever the person is saying is negative. So it's very important when the issues crop up, we should try to identify the people. We should identify the problems and separate people from the problems. So if we are not able to separate people from the problems, it will lead to emotions. It will lead to kind of behaviors which may create chaos, which may create confusion. So hence, the actual problem remains buried. So it's very important, we should leave the ego clashes, we should leave the personal differences. Once we want to go for a negotiation process, we should go with a clean slate. We should not have a kind of preconceived notion about the other party. So we should judge the person by his acts. So the first and the foremost thing that we should do, we should try to identify the problem. And we should not confuse the person associated with that problem as the problem itself. Because then there would be a kind of personality clashes, there would be ego clashes, there would be exchange of words. Okay, so then the issues would not be resolved and it would lead to acrimony between the parties concerned. So the first and the foremost step is that we should identify the problems and separate the people from the problems. The second thing is that we should focus on interests. What does focusing on interests mean? Focusing on interests means that out of this negotiation process, what am I going to get? What is my objective of entering into this negotiation process? And I should be able to prioritize what my objectives are. I have objective 1, 2, 3. And then we should also try to identify the interests of the other person. We should get into the shoes of the other person and try to find out what the other person wants. A simple example of a classical negotiation is that suppose, say, two children are fighting over a cake. Each child wants to cut the cake and have the bigger piece. What could be an ideal solution once they start fighting? It's a practical problem that, say, most of the parents may face. Once each child wants to cut the cake and have the maximum portion of the cake. This could lead an acrimony between the parties concerned. So what is the role of the parent here? Because if the parent teaches them how to decide for themselves, it would be an important lesson for them to learn for the rest of their lives. And if the parent intervenes and cuts in it, then how will the children learn? So the classical example here is that the parent can tell the children that let any person or any child cut the cake, but it would be the prerogative of the other child to choose the pieces of the cake. So one person cuts the cake and other person has it. So this is a fair, just way of negotiating. The parent has been able to identify the interests of both the parties concerned and has laid out a procedure wherein both the parties can act in a fair way, so that justice is done to the parties concerned. And they will be, if one party cuts, the other party will have to have the prerogative or the choice of selecting the piece of cakes which has been cut. So this is ideal example of identifying the interests, laying down the rules of the game. So another point in the process of negotiation that's very important is laying down the rules of the game. Because if we do not lay down the rules of negotiation process, then each person would like to interpret the things in their own way. Each person would like to interpret and try to bring out the judgment in their own favor. So it's very important that in the process of negotiation, rules are laid down and there are certain conditions that have been established wherein the negotiation process takes place. So these are some of the very important elements, areas of negotiation that a person has to consider before entering into the process of negotiation. First and foremost is to focus on the problems, identifying the problems, because otherwise, if we are not able to identify the problems, it will become a blame game. Each person would blame the other person for the failure of negotiation. And in the same way, focus on interests, because if we identify our interests, it's okay. Then we may turn a blind eye to the person who is sitting on the other side of the table. So it's very important that we are able to put ourselves in his situation, what his interests are, what does he want out of this negotiation. So if we understand his perspective, if we are able to empathize with the other party, we can negotiate in a better way. Then third area is laying down the rules of the game, playing a fair game wherein there is no scope for dishonesty, there is no scope for cheating, because if such a thing happens, it will spoil the relation and it can turn things sour, and negotiation may not be a successful process. So these are some of the safeguards for effective negotiation process. In addition to that, there are around 7 elements which determine the success of any negotiation process. So we'll be discussing how to enter into a negotiation process. The first and the foremost thing that negotiation involves people. People who have their own personalities, who have their own ideas, who have their own, emotions. So it's very important that we identify the people. We try to empathize with the people. And the first and the foremost thing is that we try to develop a relationship with the people who are involved in the process of negotiation. So first importance should be given to developing relationship. Developing relationship does not mean that we will give in our own positions. Developing relationship does not mean a sign of weakness. Developing relationship means that developing trust between the parties, so that not only this negotiation is successful, but the negotiations or the interactions that we are going to have in future are also successful. So developing negotiations means developing trust. And second thing is that one of the important aspects of developing any relationship is communicating. Communication is one of the most important instruments for carrying out this process of negotiation. Any problems in this process of communication can lead to deterioration of relationships and may also result in unsuccessful negotiations. So it's very important that the parties involved keep their channels of communication or lines of communication open. And not only they keep their channels of communication open, but they communicate straight away with one another so that there is no chance of miscommunication or misinterpretation of what has been said by the other party. So once the communication has been taken care of, both the parties have free channels of communication, they will definitely be able to develop a strong relationship between them. In addition to this, once the relationship is developed, a person can identify the interests of the other party. Both the parties would identify the interests of the other party. How they can do it? Once they communicate, once they have the relationship, they can understand one another better. So once they understand one another better, they will be able to identify the interests of each other. It's very important that interests are identified, because in order to arrive at a negotiation or in order to make the process of negotiation successful, both the parties should satisfy their interests. Otherwise, if the interests of one party are met and other party are not, the other party has the right and would use it to walk away from the process of negotiation. So it's very important that both the parties understand their interest of each other. So once the interests are understood, once I know what the other party in the negotiation process wants, needs, so we can work together to develop the options. We can work together to develop the options of what could be done, what could satisfy our interests. Say, suppose, going back to the example of the sales representative and the credit manager, we can highlight both the parties. It seemed that their positions and the interests were not in a position which could be met. But they sat together and arrived at the options and chose the best possible option, giving the credit but with a bank guarantee. So in the same case, once we sit together or able to identify our interests, we can determine what the options are. But options, we have to be very careful while determining the options. Options are which need to be discussed, and we should not decide on behalf of other party. We cannot tell the other party that these are the options in front of you. No, options need to be developed by both the parties together. Then, before arriving at a decision, both the parties involved have to determine their legitimacy. So what is legitimacy? Legitimacy is that, are they authorized to take any decisions? Say, suppose I work for a particular company. If I have to enter into a negotiation with the other party, say the other party wants that I should be given a discount of, say, 3%. But before entering into a negotiation, if the order is very large and I feel that discount of 3% is justified, but I have to see that whether I have the legitimacy as the representative of the company. Can I give such a discount? Can I give such a commitment? So it's very important, before entering into, once we discuss the options and want to arrive at a particular conclusion for the negotiation process, I have to determine my legitimacy. And in the same way, we have to see what the other party is doing. Is the other party having the kind of legitimacy which it says? So the commitments, before entering into a commitment, we have to determine the legitimacy of the parties involved. And in the same way, the next thing would be to have a kind of commitment. Once we are able to understand that the party involved, we have arrived at a particular conclusion, we can arrive at a commitment. So commitment should be written, commitment should be strong, so that no party backs out from it. But there is one more situation. Negotiations are not always successful. So it's very important that we know when to say yes and when to say no. So how to determine when we are going to say no? So the first thing would be to determine our BATNA. BATNA is best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So before entering into a negotiation process, we should know that what is our best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If we are not able to agree what is my best alternative, this can be highlighted by an example that if I want to sell a car for 1,20,000 rupees, the other person, and minimum my BATNA is that, say such a car sells for 1,10,000 rupees. Any person offering me an amount below 1,10,000 rupees, I should not accept, because then I am losing. So this was the process of negotiation, how we should negotiate effectively, and in our this session we have covered all the aspects related to negotiation, and I hope after listening to this lecture you would be able to give a better thought to the process of negotiation and negotiate in your lives in a more effective manner. Thank you very much.